Hello, everyone. All right. Hi. I didn't know how much my voice would carry down here. We have acoustic tiles and whatnot. Welcome. My name is Holly Legue. I'm the library director here in Thetford, and I'm so pleased that you could all join us tonight. We've been really looking forward to this program. I am doing just a very brief welcome and hello. I want to turn it over as quickly as I can to our speakers, but just to introduce the man who is bringing this all my way, Mr. Doug Tiff. He's actually suggested 3 different events for us this summer, some at the Peabody Library and then this one here. And it was so easy to say yes to Treasure Island history, loons, and beavers. I mean, you don't say no to this. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Doug, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you to Holly for being so open to all these talks that are not always originating with me. The one on beavers is next month, and that's being sponsored by the West Fairlee Conservation Commission in conjunction with Treasure Island, because we do have beaver lodges, dank beaver lodges on Treasure Island, and part of that will be a tour of those. So it's pretty easy when there's so much interesting stuff going on, mainly involving animals. So tonight we're going to do kind of a tag team effort, and I'll mention who's going to be here. First of all, I'm Doug Tiff. I live in Fairlee, on the right where Blood Brook flows into the lake, the northern end of Lake Fairlee. Very wet, marshy, better for animals than for people, we've found. So we're slowly turning the land back over to the beavers, and I swear, because we stopped trapping out the beavers, they created a habitat that said open for business to, among other things, the loons. I was part of Eric Hanson's crew doing the loon count when, in fact, 5 years into that, we discovered 2 loons had established a nest at the mouth of Blood Brook. And it's the first time in anybody's living memory that there have been nesting loons. And so that's how I got started on hosting the loons on my end of the lake. I'll mention a little bit more about that too, because in the end I attend their loon nesting raft. But anyways, Sean Brown is also going to speak. He lives on the other end of Lake Fairlee. He's very active, has come to town, within 5, 6 years?
4 years.
4 years, okay. It seems like he's been here a long time. He's on the Lake Fairlee Association board, and he also heads up the Water Quality Action Committee. Spends a lot of time with his hands in the water. And he's going to talk about his initiative. He's the brains behind the Loon Cam. And then Eric Hanson is, as many of you know, he heads up the Loon Conservation Project for Vermont. It's sponsored by the Vermont Center for Ecostudies. And he's been at it for over 25 years. 1998, I believe he came. And he's the one who corrals all of us volunteers to do things. So it's very important that anything he has to say is worth listening to, and that will be the real substance of the program. So I'm not going to take too much time on my part. I'm just going to frame it all for you all. But I also thought I should mention that we're very pleased to have the new Community Science Director for Vermont Center for Ecostudies is here, Dana Williams. Can you wave your hand? So she was inaugurated this evening, getting a tour of the southern end of Lake Fairlee, trying to see the lake as a loon would, a paired loon. Okay, imagine, recently we've bequeathed loons looking for a place to set up. So Eric has heard that there's interest, and people are observing that there's possibilities of a second pair of loons wanting to settle down on Lake Fairlee. So Eric, taking the bull by the horns, we went out in kayaks just a couple hours ago looking at possible places that a loon might want to set up, but they have to show the initiative. But people observing really matters, and I hear about that a lot because I'm often called on to say, what's going on, this loon looks sick, when in fact it's just having a really good bath. And also I wanted to call out somebody else. Ian Clark. Anybody who watches his blog, he's a very patient and an excellent photographer. I think many of you have seen him. He's often, in Daybreak and so on. This is a man who makes the Loon Cam look like what it is, just a machine. If you ever have a chance to go to one of his talks, do that. Very sensitive, very good photography, and you learn a lot about the loons. That's why we call it Loon Stories, because for the first time we're able to see our loons 24/7. This is the second year we've had the Loon Cam set up, and I was going to say that there's really two ways we have properly intervened on our end of the lake since the loons first nested at the mouth of Blood Brook in 2016. The first was on the second year, 2017, after they successfully hatched a chick, and we had the very first chick born on Lake Fairlee in 2016. They came back, and as you may know, loons establish a territory. They're familiar with this area. They're likely to come back. It's usually the same pair. And the second year they came back and nested on Treasure Island, on the island part of Treasure Island, which was okay. We went there. We started to designate the area. We were going to close the island for their nesting period, but then a raccoon got the eggs. Because nesting on the shore is one of the liabilities of being a loon. It's either inundated by water or gotten by predators. I alerted Eric. At that point, I'm in touch with Eric because he likes to know everything there is to know about nesting loons. And within 2 days, he was down with a loon nesting raft, something I wasn't familiar with that much. But he and his interns established the Lake Fairlee loon nesting raft just off my shore, right in a cove that we share with Treasure Island on the northern end. And amazingly, within a week, the loons re-nested there and successfully hatched another round of chicks. And that's continued now. Every year, the loons come back, and there's been ups and downs and variations, but we've now hatched, I think, 8 chicks in the last 9 years. And given that even now there's fewer than 100 chicks surviving every year in Vermont, by the end of August, I think we're up to 70, 74, something like that this year. 80 something maybe. But anyway, so we've added our share to the fewer than 100 chicks that are hatched each year in Vermont. Anyways, I was going to comment that the big change for us obviously was a loon nesting raft. That's a big intervention, right? People build this thing and put it there, and it turns out it makes all the difference in certain situations where you don't want loons nesting on a public beach, or you don't want loons susceptible to critters like raccoons, and so that to me was a successful way that you could interact in a positive way with a species that really is very sociable. People like loons a lot. They seem to relate to them. And so my job was to be out there with binoculars and so on and try to keep an eye on them, put out buoys to keep the people away during that period. So there's lots of ways that I was having to be very active. But then last year, Sean Brown suggested that, well, we've got this one place where we know the loons are going to be for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, and you can be positive that they're going to stay right there because that's what they want to do. They want to occupy the nest, they want to build it, they do mating and everything else, and we'll set up a camera right opposite that. He was inspired by what the New Hampshire Loon Preservation Committee had done with their loon nesting raft. And so, and their Loon Cam. Anyway, so the Loon Cam was a game changer for us suddenly. We had the ability to keep a close eye on them and start to see them not just during the day, but with the infrared light, we could see what they were doing at night too. And you could see more about behavior. You could piece together things. You could see, for example, we've had a real hard time in the last couple of years with the loons even being able to create an egg. It turns out infertility is an issue. Sometimes it's possibly because of, toxicity in the environment, things like that they might be worried about. But without the camera, we would think maybe the eggs were getting taken by something. But no, we were able to have observations that show that, yes, in fact, it's very hard for a loon to create an egg. But they do it with great vigor, believe me, and they do it repeatedly the same day. And I won't go into it, but it just shows that when it's time to do what they need to do, they do it. And it's remarkable. And so there's this sense of story emerging. So that's what I'm trying to get at. That's why we put the word story in so much of what we're talked about tonight. So Sean's going to take us through the loon nesting camera setup and some of possibly stories that he can share with us. And then Eric will take the stage and he's going to give us his talk, which is called The Common Loon, Stories About a Loon's Life and Their Conservation. And then we'll close at the end with a compilation of some of the highlights. If you've gone to the Lake Fairlee Association website, you'll see that in 2023 we posted 25 highlight videos. These are segments that we captured where something really interesting was happening. This year we have 45 of them. And it's gotten a lot better, and Sean can tell you why, because we discovered something else inside the camera. It has to do with a large audience that fits inside this camera from all around the world. And I think Sean can elaborate on that. That's another story that we were really astounded by, was how many loon observers there are around the world and how much they were helping us with our observations. So Sean, can you begin your talk about the loon cam? Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. I didn't realize it was going to be a full house tonight, so I have to do this real quick. Right, all right. So I'm Sean Brown, as Doug said. I live on the south end of Lake Fairlee, on Vermont Center Road. So I had a close encounter with a dermatologist this morning, which is why you see this right here. It's not a tattoo. As you know, he wouldn't take the argument that I had a presentation to give tonight. I didn't really want to have the biopsy done, but that didn't hold sway with him. So Doug did a great job introducing kind of what we did with the loon cam and the raft and everything. And what I wanted to try and do a little bit is just spend a few minutes talking about kind of what inspired us to do this, and then hand it over to Eric to talk more about loon behavior, etc. So building and operating the loon cam has been an incredibly rewarding experience for me personally. I didn't know anything about loons when I took this on. I remember talking with Doug about the initial idea of putting a loon cam out there. I originally was thinking, it'll be just a wildlife cam, and we'll capture the images and post them online. And it quickly evolved into a live streaming thing. And so I went out and bought all the equipment and started putting it all together. And then he told me that they're only out there for 6 weeks. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought they would be there from May until they flew away in October, and little did I know they were only going to be there for a couple of weeks. So that was a surprise. But it has been very rewarding. It's great to know that the live cam also has brought so much joy to people who watch it. How many of you actually have tuned it in on YouTube? Great, that's a good number. It's a lot of fun to watch the comments, the chat, and often you see some really interesting things take place. So why do we do a loon cam? So we want to observe the life cycle of reproduction. So this is something that people aren't sitting out there in a lawn chair looking at a loon 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to see what happens. So a loon cam provides an opportunity to actually see what the loons are doing, throughout that life cycle. Let me just see if I can. Switching back and forth here, unfortunately. We learn about the challenges to that life cycle. So what encounters do they have with other wildlife that makes it challenging for them to have offspring, to have a successful hatch? And so eagles, there are, let's take a look here, beavers. So this is a snap of the loon cam in the middle of the night, and you can see the loon beak right here looking at this beaver that has started to crawl up onto the raft, and it had been circling the raft for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then finally was going to make a jaunt onto the raft, and the loon quickly put a stop to that. But very interesting to see. Geese. So these geese had taken respite on the loon raft, and the loon came up under the water and appeared all of a sudden right next to the raft and startled the geese, and you can see that they're a little bit surprised. So that was pretty interesting. Turtles. So this is a big snapper that is native to the area and lives in the area and spent a lot of time on the raft. In fact, after the eggs had been laid, we were watching in despair about how the turtle had climbed onto the raft and crawled right over the eggs and went off the raft on the other side. And we thought for sure that the eggs were toast at that point. But they survived, and amazing. And then also something that you don't normally see on a day-to-day basis, but is good to pay attention to, is human behavior and how it can potentially impact loon nesting. Hopefully this is none of you in here. This was a fisherman who got his lure caught on the loon raft.
There's a sign that says "Do not cross."
Oh yeah, and the signs were all around there saying "Do not." And he spent a lot of time fishing. This is last year. This is something that happened last year. And I got his hook on there and spent a little time trying to free it up. Let's see. And then, let's see. How do we know that people are getting joy from Loon Camp? Well, we watch the chat. The chat on the YouTube channel is really amazing. And these are some regulars: Tail Feather, Gail H. from Minnesota, Claire, I think from the UK. They are pretty much on this thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, chatting away. And you can see, you know, that they add the timestamps, and it's fantastic. And I can look at the chat, or Doug can look at the chat, and say, hey, Sean, you might want to go grab a capture of this event that somebody captured on the chat. And so this is a really good little interaction. One of the problems with YouTube is it scrolls chat. So every 24 hours the chat disappears and you lose it. So from the time the eggs were laid until the chicks hatched around the 4th of July, I was on the chat every day, capturing in a Google document all the chat. And so I have about 300 or 400 pages of chat that happened during that period, and it's really just magical to read through that and see kind of how people respond to seeing what's going on the Loon Cam every day. It's really something. So very special. Let's see. The Loon Cam was moved to the Lake Fairlee Association YouTube channel in April of this year. Last year I hosted it on my own channel. That quickly got me up to 550 subscribers for myself, which nobody pays attention to me, so it doesn't matter. They wanted the Loon Cam. I've moved the Loon Cam to the LFA channel. We're now up to about 600 subscribers. 600 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about Lake Fairlee and a local Loon Cam, that's a pretty good population. The live stream has over 61,000 views since between April and about a month ago. That accounts for about 14,000 hours of view time. So you think about that. Usually, you know, people go onto YouTube site, they watch a video for a few seconds, and they flip it off and go to another one. People are watching this thing 14,000 hours of view time on the Loon Cam. It's really something striking for something so small. There were over 15,000 chat messages over the course of that couple of month period when the loons were out there. And on average, there were about 5 people watching at any given time during the day. That was our average, 5 viewers. Sometimes it got up to 60 when maybe the hatches were going on the 4th of July, and all the way down to, you know, just a couple, you know, tail feather at night, getting timestamps. So pretty amazing. So I just wanted to show you that this is the Loon Cam. So this is mounted to an iron post that Dale Gephardt donated to the cause last year. It's an Axis security camera. You see these all the time. These are common on highways and at banks and wherever. There's a microphone right here, and then this network cable. And this network cable actually runs underneath, down the post, into the water, along the bottom of the lake bed, until it comes out at shoreline. There's the Loon Cam mounted to the post. There's the nest right there, and then it runs all the way to Doug's shed house. They got crushed by a pine last year.
But the Loon Cam continued to operate.
The Loon Cam continued to operate. So I don't know if you can see it. The wire runs through the grass here, underneath the shed, and then up this, and then it goes to this little device here, and that is a wireless connector that basically creates a wireless bridge to Doug's house and connects to the internet. So it's all wireless. Let's see, and then what's the last? That's it. So good. That was the end of the slideshow. So that's all I really wanted to go through. Was I wanted to show you the Loon Cam, talk a little bit about the chat and the excitement that it generates. Oh yeah, we got to disconnect that. Okay. And again, if you view it, I'm glad that you're out there on it. It's off for now, and it will be until the spring, when we hope to have another successful season on the lake. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
What Sean failed to mention is that the viewers, Claire was in Ireland, so she would always watch during the night and tell us what happened and that kind of thing. And KLH is apparently a housebound bird viewer. I mean, bird watcher. These are people who had active lives watching birds, and now they watch these stations. And it's a different kind of world out there of people who are really astute. And they're also very insistent. So they would send us commands. Doug, there's a boat too close. go chase it away. Or Sean, we need a close up on the egg hatching. And it was very interesting. It's very interactive for us. And they're also extremely grateful. The other aspect of it is that the way Sean has the camera, you could see all the way across the lake, past Treasure Island, up into the hills, and particularly peepers in the spring were just enchanting to them. And even after the loons had left, they loved Lake Fairlee in ways that only someone seeing it like that could. And it made us appreciate where we live. So there's this other aspect of, call it what you want, a specific kind of social media by genuine, knowledgeable enthusiasts. And so that's why I'm hoping in some ways at the end of the program, we're going to watch a few clips. I'm hoping Eric can make us better observers. A lot of people are just interested in because they find loons entertaining, but we want to see if we can become better observers, because we started to sense their story better by watching this narrative. People were absorbed by this. Eric, please take the...
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sean. And the webcam to have that sort of 24-hour observation gives us insights into things we used to speculate about. Like, we know the last few years we've had some beaver interactions that, like, in the nests have failed, and we're like, you know, was it the beavers that did it? Was it something else just by chance? And the beavers were seen kind of harassing the loons, or the loons harassing the beavers. And in this case, it confirmed that it doesn't always happen. Beavers were like right there. The loons were able to kind of position themselves and like, okay, you stay away. Other places we think that there actually were interactions based on the failed nest part. So it's not going to always happen that beavers are going to cause failure, but it can happen. But in this case, it's like, well, they can actually sort of live in proximity to each other. Because we've had nests that are 100 feet from the beaver lodge, and the nest is successful. So it can definitely work. But what about those situations where it doesn't? So it'll be interesting next year if the beavers actually cause a ruckus and actually cause a nest failure, and actually document that. It would be a great master's thesis on something like that. The snapping turtles, people are like, well, they eat a loon egg. Well, this guy went like nose to nose with a loon egg and walked right over it, and just like no big deal. Snapping turtles will take loon chicks. We know that. We don't know what percentage, because most times you have no idea why a chick disappears. They're just gone, and you're like, what was it? Was it the eagle? Was it parental? They just weren't taking care of it. Was it snapping turtle, big fish, big bass, pike, something like that? So I think that the cameras are just giving us all sorts of insights and helping either confirm or like, oh, that was a speculation that's not right at all. So it'll be interesting to see as more and more of this is done in New Hampshire, a little bit in Maine. There's been a few, I think, and then now this one. So it's really, really fun to be part of. So thank you for making that happen, and we just look forward to learning more from it. And again, at the end, we'll see some actual video, so for those who want to stick around. So the Loon Project is under a group called Vermont Center for Ecostudies. They're based down in Norwich. How many people are familiar with VCE? Phew. You raised that question up in St. Johnsbury, or I work out of home in Craftsbury, and it's like VCE. Who's VCE? And so we're trying to like definitely raise the bar, but you're in their network down here a little bit more, so it's great. And this is just one of the major projects that we have going. These are a lot of the projects that we have, and it's just a mass list, but Mountain Birdwatch is a super active bird program, lots of birding, forest bird monitoring program. Our origins were sort of in birding. A lot of work up on mountaintops with the bicknell's thrush, which led us to go to do work in the Caribbean. We found bicknells were going to the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and we've spread out over the last 15 years, and like, are they in Puerto Rico, or are they in Cuba? And it's not me doing all that work, but Chris Rimmer, our director, who retired 2 years ago, was doing a lot of that. And we now have a guy, Jim Getz, who's sort of overseeing that as the Caribbean coordinator. So he spends a good chunk of his life down there. So lots of neat projects going on there beyond just the bicknell's thrush, like huge regional things for endemics, as well as habitat conservation and working with local groups. And that's really what VC is doing down there, is trying to embolden other groups to take the lead, and we're just helping the process of what questions to answer and things like that. I'll finish off by this Vermont Atlas of Life, insect work, plant work, pollination projects. That's where a lot of our work has been focused in the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of it is using huge databases with butterflies and bees, moths. They're actually using a good use of AI, cameras on sheets that the moths will go to with the ultraviolet lights. Yeah. Anyway, they'll gather, and the cameras are scanning this all night long when we're asleep, and they're identifying all those species, which is really difficult to do for a species like that. So they're working on creating databases using that type of data, which is the basis of that is like, what's out there, what's not out there, where are they, where were they 20 years ago, where were they 50 years ago, where were they 100 years ago, when we gather all that data from UVM professors' books up on the cupboard, and we get it all digitized and put in, and all of a sudden we have records from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. We can compare it to what's going on today. So it's just some amazing work going on a very big scale. We're also trying to make all that data publicly available to anyone who wants to use it, so it gets used in a much more broad way than we would ever think of in our own little myopic minds. We think we're doing it all, but we're not. Mountain birdwatch data has been used all over Europe now for high elevation species and what's going on with climate change, and people just looking at it in a slightly different angle. So public source or making that all work. So, and the plant pollination stuff is a place that just hasn't been much research. So that's where we're doing, because there's now been lots of bird work, and we're moving on to some of that. Luckily, I get to keep my loon hat on because it's a popular species, but it's also one that's right there with us. So we're always in a little bit of tension. Luckily, for the last 20 years, it's mostly been good. So, they're an amazing bird. We can now watch them 24 hours a day. We used to be able to watch them just during the daylight hours, but there's not too many animals that you can watch for every hour of the day and not interfere with what they're doing. While they're sitting on the nest, while they're rearing the young, while they're learning how to fly, while they're defending. And we get to see that. Most animals are hidden. We see a glimpse of it and then it's gone. So we get very connected to them that way. I partner with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, mainly working with the wardens, with usually birds in trouble, caught in fishing line, some on a crash land on a road or something like that. And we do get some baseline funding from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. But really, the main thing is that I'm a coordinator of all the people, groups on the right, especially volunteers. We have about 350 active volunteers. Some of them are just helping out with our annual count. We got other people who are like Doug and Sean who are doing something almost every day, at least checking, and everything in the middle. But we got state parks, state land. We got DEC with contaminants, Tufts University, hydroelectric dams, working with all those. And when loons decide to nest right next to someone's dock, who owns that land? Who is that person? How do they use it? So I spent a lot of time talking with landowners, tracking them down, figuring out what's going to work, what's not going to work. Most of my funding comes from individual donors, so we're always looking for support to help out. We get a few grants, but it's hard to fund long-term projects like this. So again, if you know people, if you're able to help out, we're always looking for it. Which reminds me, I forgot to pass these around. If anyone wants more information about VCE, if you're not already on the list, put your name and address and we'll send you some of the newsletters. There's a bunch of handouts on the table up here, both about loons, some individual stories, our lead fishing gear project. So, got a pen, and I'll send that one that direction. Great. And we'll just send you a newsletter, the field notes, and then also next summer we would send you the loon caller, which is a loon one I do once a year. So, the photographs in this slideshow are almost all from local folks in Vermont, which is kind of fun. That's a loon raft up in Forest Lake near the Canadian border. But I'm going to start with the first, 8 or 9 slides just on the conservation story. I'm going to focus more on behavior today, partly because of the loon cam. And I'm not going to get into the conservation in great detail and what we've all done, but and how it's all the details of why that is. But this was why we have a conservation program. 1983, 7 nests. So Thurman-Dix Reservoir, just up in Barrie, just outside Barrie, was the most southern. And then we had 5 other pairs that were around, but not nesting that year. So that was kind of the low point. Just a lot of empty lakes. Why? There were lots of things, and I just throw this up there as kind of to overload you a little bit. Shoreline development, all the things happening around our lakes, water quality, potential issues, toxins. We aren't really sure what the DDT issue was back in the 60s and 50s, but chance that had an issue, but no one ever measured it. It was in osprey, it was in eagles, so it probably was in loons. Was that a major factor or a minor one? We don't know. Direct human disturbance was a real big one right after World War II and the redevelopment of all of our lakes, with lots more cottages, lots more boating activity. Loons like to nest within 1 to 2 feet, 1 to 3 feet of the water line, and if it's on an island where people like to visit and picnic or have camp, it may not work. It probably won't work. Invasives, we've had a huge outbreaks over the last 30 years of botulism out in the Great Lakes. Haven't seen that in the Midwest, but it could affect some of our loons in the future. Immune deficiency, that's all sorts of things from parasites to a fungal disease that can just essentially make the bird weaker and other things happen to them. So it's something we want to watch. Winter mortality, lots of things going on down there. And a big one was water manipulation. That's been going on in Vermont ever since we settled and put in dams for our little sawmills and all of that. Water levels going up and down. If it was going up and down by more than 6-7 inches, and it was happening every few weeks to a month, that could have caused nest failure for decades, if not longer. That's the speculation, just based on kind of what I've watched with how water levels are affected on small ponds. But most of our lakes over 50-60 acres have a dam on them in Vermont. So lots of things that contributed to their decline. Our lakes are just busy with people. There's fishing gear out there. There's raccoons and fox and mink and eagles, and then shoreline development. So those are all things that loons are having to face. And to help deal with that, we focus on monitoring all the pairs, seeing where they are, where they're nesting, what do they need, which ones might need benefit from some management, and I'll go through that in a minute. Lots of education. I probably do more education programs than most of the VCE staff, as well as the management, whereas a lot of the other VCE work is research. We make volunteers a pivotal piece of this. Doug and the crew here at Lake Fairlee Association are a prime example of the success of that. They've become the loon educators, and they just have spread the word about what do loons need to be successful, and that works. It really works really well because it's your neighbor talking to you. We do rescues, so birds in trouble. Well, I remember, I'm not going into rescues tonight, but we did one in 2013, fishing line on Lake Fairlee. We were able to catch it. We don't always catch those birds. We banded it. The next year, I think, it could have been 2 years later, it was seen on Post Pond over in New Hampshire as in part of the nesting pair. So it was cool that we gave that bird a second chance. And then we do a little bit of research and through banding and capture and toxin work. What's great is volunteers can partake in almost all of it. So here's where nesting is one of the most critical and most vulnerable periods. They can just be easily disturbed off the site to be safe, but lots of things can cause a nest failure from human disturbance. If habitat's limited and they nest in bad spots, predators easily get to a nest, especially shoreline nests, and then flooding can be a big issue, especially last year and this year in 2019. And just a little natural history, they'll start anytime from early mid-May all the way until late June, sometimes early July. It takes about a month. They can nest at 3, but really they have to come back to this area and then spend a few years figuring out where they're going to find a spot in a territory. So it's a long time. They like marshes and places with little water around them, or islands, because that's where they can get away from the shoreline predators, which is probably the biggest cause of nest failure.
Do they pair like 6 or 7 years? Or they?
I'll get into that.
Oh my God.
Okay. So we put these signs out for the busy spots, and they tend to work. It sort of spreads the education focus out. This bird is actually in hiding position with its head down. If it's calm and relaxed, it's going to be just sitting upright, looking around. But if it goes into that hiding position, it's getting out of bird shape, and a lot of predators are focused on either shape or movement. So that's why it's doing that. So if you come in, sometimes they can be really reactionary, and you can be 200 meters away, and the bird goes down. Other times you could be within 40 feet, 30 feet, and for whatever reason, it's just watching you and waves and says hi. It's just like, go figure. But we use probably too many signs, but at the same time, they do work. For the flooding issue, and it used to be predator issue, we put out these floating rafts. So great project for kids. I've used lots of our interns and others to build the Fairlee rafts. But mainly with reservoirs, for rafts, we're dealing with flooding issues where we know it's going to flood consistently. We don't do it so much for predation anymore because loons are doing so well right now. It's okay to have some nest failure, especially if it's natural like that, or if they're continually trying to nest right near somebody and they're causing a conflict. It's just not going to work with a dock right there and the grandchildren coming next weekend and okay, can we put a raft in where we're going to get them out of the way. Lake Fairlee is a great example of that, getting them away from Treasure Island. And we got them to get to that raft. Doesn't always work. Sometimes they'll just go right back and nest in the bad spot, but sometimes it does. And those management, the rescues, all sorts of things have led to this graph, which you don't see in too many conservation stories. So you can see back, 15 pairs, and then mid-90s it just started to grow. And so our nesting pairs right here, this year we actually topped out at 123. We had 10 new pairs this year. They're squeezing in on some smaller bodies of water. They're forming a second pair like we might be seeing on Lake Fairlee at the south end. So we're going to be watching those south shorelines. The thing to watch for a new pair, actually anytime you're looking for a pair nesting, is you see the twosome in late April, early May, and you see 2 1 week, come out the next week, paddle around, you're only seeing 1. If you only see 1, it might be worth coming back in a few days rather than a week. And are you still only seeing 1 loon? Where'd that other one go? Because they're on the nest 98, 97% of the time, and then they switch places. So there's a chance that maybe if we had a twosome and a real territorial pair, one has actually found a nest site. rarely, I mean, sometimes you can actually see them working on a site and throwing stuff in a pile, and that can take a week or 2 or 3. Depends if they're consistently going at it. So it's been a really good success that way. But you notice the chick numbers are starting to level off, and we're still like right in here this year. We have more nests, but fewer chicks as a percent. So why the failure? Competition. They're battling with each other all the time, and they're abandoning their nest. They're not nesting. They lose a chick while they're dealing with an intruder loon. Lake Iroquois lost both their chicks to a gull while the parents were dealing with an intruder loon. They usually stash the chicks. We'd never documented that before. I'd always wondered, could it be just negligence that causes a chick loss? So oftentimes the intruder might come in and actually kill the chick and put a dent in the pair bond and maybe be able to win a spot in that territory, which I'm going to focus on in a few minutes. Anyway, so that was kind of an interesting observation that the volunteers who just happened to be out there and witnessing, and it actually wasn't the volunteer who saw it, it was someone else who knew the volunteer. And so again, that web of communication, because of that volunteer, we got more information. It's like there's probably a magnitude more people involved in loons than I've ever met. I've met Doug. I've met 3 or 4 of you in the audience. So, and I don't know if I've ever met Ian, but we've communicated for a decade. So great to meet you. So really fun.
Loons fight with each other?
Oh, it's a major part of loon life. Yeah. So, and sometimes if it's a targeted lake, it could be on a daily basis. Other times the pair is really strong. Other birds might fly in, take a look at each other, and then just go away if it's a strong pair. But no, it's how I'm getting. We'll cover that really thoroughly in a minute. We're gonna finish the conservation bit here. So here's where they are today. So central Vermont now has a fair number of loons. Southern Vermont has a few loons, mainly as a function of lakes. We just don't have that many lakes in central and southern Vermont, whereas most of our lakes are up north central and northeast. So it's an amazing success story. And this year we counted, I think we're up to about 390 something on our annual count, which is a third Saturday of July. We try to hit about 170 lakes around the state. And again, 123 nests, and we're still, I got to finalize numbers, but it's 80 something for chicks. Okay, so now we'll totally switch gears and get into sharing a lot of stories and research that's been done over the last 3 decades about birds, mainly banded birds, and knowing what they're up to. And so this will enhance, hopefully, what Doug was talking about, that ability to kind of watch. What are they doing? Tonight, we're out there, there's 2 birds doing this, like, swimming in circles and bill splashing. It's September. It's like, is that courtship? Is it a defense? It's like they should have, like, no territoriality stuff going on now, or at least not very much. Dana was wondering, is it the pair just kind of doing an end-of-season courtship before they go to different places on the ocean? We know they migrate to different places. We don't really know the answer to that, especially at this time of year. In May, it would make sense that we got courtship going on or we got defense, but it's hard to say. They could be, but it's most likely there's something going on. There were some aggressive splash dives. It's just like, again, I'll get onto that. And we don't talk about flight at all in this program, so have anyone seen a loon take off? It's pretty cool. I mean, it's like, whoa, come on, you can do it, They're probably one of the heaviest birds per wing surface area out there. And it just like, once they get going, they're like a jet, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. But they got to get there before they're cruising like that. So,
Eric, it's worth pointing out that there's solid bones.
Yep, one of the few birds with solid bones for diving.
But not solid bones.
So behaviors, we got May, we got 2 birds swimming around, they're really casual with each other. Yeah, it's the pair. The chick hatches, take care of the chick, no big deal. But then in May, you also see this, 2 birds swimming around with their bills down. This is kind of a little bit of what we were seeing tonight. And that could be courtship, but it could also be 2 birds having a discussion. One part of the territory, a third bird who's swam in or flown in and is like, hey, how's your territory going? Do you think I could win a spot in here? Think I could throw you kick you out? Or a lake that only has 2 birds usually, and all of a sudden there's 4. Where are those other 2 birds? Where'd they come from? What's their status? Are they young? Are they old? So those are a lot of the questions that Walter Piper's been trying to answer for 25 years.
Well, Lake Fairlee, we call them the Miller Pond Gang.
Yes. Oh, those poor birds. I can't wait to tell my volunteer up there, John and Terry. Anyway, Walter was studying song sparrows when I met him back in 1992, my first loon job, catching and banding loons. And he was following sparrows and trying to study their behaviors. He's like, wow, you put these bands on. I wonder if I could follow them around and study loon behavior. No one had really ever done it. But the problem is, you individually mark a bird with 2 color bands on one leg, 2 on the other. So here's what it looks like. But they really only reveal themselves when they're preening, which might be once every 2 to 4 hours, and they get the leg up and they're facing the other way and you don't see the color. Sometimes on busy lakes where they're used to boat traffic, you can kind of drift in and you can actually see that leg floating underwater a little bit. It's actually in my top 10 of phone calls. There's a bird with a bobber on its leg, or on the back of its body, and it's that leg just sort of flitting back behind the bird, and it's a banded bird, not a bobber. So by seeing those combinations, you can tell what bird it is, where it was banded, and was it part of that pair that you banded last year or 5 years ago, or 30 years ago in some cases. So to do that work, we actually have to catch them, and we do it at night, and you pretend to be another loon coming in with a spotlight, you blind them, and then you give a little and you get the bird to kind of like pause, because they're like, oh, there's a third bird here. I got to defend my chick. And you can only really reliably do it when there's a small 2 to 6 week old chick. And they'll stay close to that chick. You can get close enough and put an 8-foot handled dip net, salmon dip net, right in front of them. They hear the splash, see it, and then they go down. And you just pull. It's pretty exciting. You pull the bird out, you get a towel over the head, and it takes a crew to hold on to one of these things. So those are 2 high school kids that helped me a few years ago. And yeah, it's a real experience to hold one of those guys. We'll take blood and feather samples. So I've not done a lot of blood sampling, but I guess I did in this photograph. Here's the guy who created it all. This, if you look at the date of that photograph,
92.
that's how long I've been doing this. And Dave Evers was the one who created this technique reliably for catching and banding, and then all the studies that have come from it. And I'll be sharing a bunch of those tonight. So one of the first things was, do loons always come back to the same lake? Do they mate for life? And we discovered that no. In a typical year, 70 to 83% of the birds do come back, but 30 to 17%, there's one that does not return. Like, what's going on with that? And so we've discovered that the average marriage lasts 4 to 5 years, and then there's a switch in one of the mates. So over time, they might have several partners, they may actually get kicked out. They move to another territory. But during the breeding season itself, they are monogamous. Unlike a lot of songbirds, which do all sorts of what we call EPCs, extra pair copulations, where they sneak off this way and that way. Loons are pretty faithful in that regard. But what happened to the missing partner? Mortality is about 7 or 8% in a given year. Most of that probably happens on the ocean. They may have moved to a different lake. We don't know why. Or this one that's just the most interesting, these evictions or territory takeovers. And it's a pretty substantial number for that 30% crowd. That 30% turnover in a bird happens more on big lakes where loons, territory or intruders can just swim into a territory and swim out. That 17% is when birds have to fly into like a Miller Pond and then do a challenge. It takes a lot more energy to fly in than to swim in. So you get less turnover on a small pond. This is called wing rowing. That's a territorial chase that's going on up there. So we'll get into some of the details. So I've already shown that picture, 2 birds with their bill down. They're having a discussion. But again, it could be love, it could be, you better leave soon or otherwise I'm gonna get angry at you. Here's a picture where there's definitely an intruder over on the left. And see that chest coming out of the water with the one in the middle? That guy's getting angry, or she. They'll both do it. Male and female will defend against that intruder. Sometimes, especially midsummer and later, but it can happen earlier, you get these bigger groups, and we call them social gatherings. There's a lot less aggression going on, but there's still a lot of things being communicated. Who's the pair? How strong are they? Do I have a chance for a takeover next year, later this summer? Do I sense a weakness? Or whoa, I'm not touching these guys. These guys are strong and they're gonna hold the territory really well. It's also getting to know the neighbors. Okay, Joe's over there, Bill's over there, Susan's over there. I mean, they all know each other and they all know each other's calls. So it's kind of a neat thing, and it pays off to know everybody, because what happens if somebody dies in the ocean, just has a bad year, gets sick, doesn't make it back? If you're familiar with those other birds, you might have a better chance of winning a slot in that territory by being familiar with everything. So let's jump back to chicks, and then we'll move back into the territories and finding spots in territories. But males banded as chicks often are seen at 3 to 4 years of age. They spend those first, second, and parts of their third year on the ocean. They usually do not come back up here. Occasionally you'll get them to come back, and we call them subadults or immature adults. And they're 1 and 2 year olds. They look like a big chick. So you can get them, but you'd see them in June or July maybe. And you don't see a big chick until August, September. There's also a slight difference in the plumage. But it takes them 3 to 4 years to find a spot in a territory. So males 5 to 7 years of age. Females, it's all a little bit later. It takes them a little bit longer to both before they come back, as well as finding a spot in a territory. So 7 or 8 years of age before most females nest. This is all based on the Wisconsin birds that Walter Piper's been studying. So finding that spot in the territory, you might go to an unoccupied lake. That's 38%. That's especially true for younger birds who are smaller and not as fit as a strong 5 to 10 year old male, or older males that have been kicked out of a territory, no longer want to deal with fights. I'm just going to go, there's an empty spot over there, hang out. Like, anyone interested? I have a spot here. So that's one way that they find a territory. Passive replacement, that's just when one has disappeared. It could have been mortality, it could have been they just moved without a fight. So there's lots of possibilities there. And then again, the most exciting one is the eviction, or the SAT word, usurpation. Yeah, isn't that a good one? I did horrible on my SATs, so I got that one. So,
What's their lifespan? Yeah.
So we used to say 20 to 30 years, and Walter's definitely noted birds start disappearing after 20. So things are happening more mortality-wise after 20. But there's now a pair in Michigan, or well, they're no longer a pair. He was banded in 1987, and was seen at least last year. So what does that put him at?
36,
37. The female was banded in 93 as an adult, which makes it that she's probably at least 6 years old. She could have been 10 years old, so she might be close to 40. 3 years ago, it made national news. They got together in 97. Those two birds. They stayed together until 2021 or 22. That's like blows the 4 to 5 year average way off. So there are pairs that will stick it out. I mean, if they're both strong and they can hold the territory and not be, and they stay healthy, they'll mate sort of for life, in that regard. Well, anyway, that spring they were first seen together, and then all of a sudden they weren't, and she was with a new guy. Yeah.
Is he gone?
He wasn't banded yet, so we don't really know for sure. But yeah, really interesting. And they produced 31 chicks together over that time period. So that's way above average. So those Midwesterners, This is in the UP of Michigan. Not near Lake Wobegon, but anyway, close to it. I grew up in Minnesota, so it's kind of my home turf, but married a Vermonter. So yeah, that usurpation stuff's really kind of fun. But really it's the 5 to 10 year old males that are doing most of the challenges. Males and females will both defend, but if the male's really after that site and decides to fight it out, he'll go after the male. The female will sit back and accept the winner. But females will also fight, and they'll challenge each other, usually not to the death. Males may challenge each other to the death or injury. Females are going to back off sooner if there's going to be with a takeover, but they don't. It's not the statistics are just like not as strong for females. It doesn't happen quite as often, and compared to males, it's like spot on. They're testosterone driven 5 to 10 year olds. The 15 to 25 year old male in the human world. Anyway,
Are they fighting for the partner or the territory?
probably the territory because it's got food, it's got nest. It's it's a proven history, and I haven't put it up here yet, but they tend to do more intrusions and more takeovers in places that have had chicks in the past. So it's a success rate kind of measure. But yeah, in some places you'll get 2 to 5 visits in a day with all these intrusions, and so they're really doing it. So, but the female again, it's a little more not quite so hard set for all of that. But what do they use for information? Those social gatherings. 2 years ago they flew in, they checked the pair out, there's a chick. Well, if there's a chick, there's more likely to be more intrusions. The other part is if there's been a recent change in male or female, then there's more likely to be another takeover. So you get this sort of a compound escalating effect. And I sort of anthropomorphize, but it's like a weaker pair bond with a new pair. They haven't really established themselves amongst all those local loons in those social gatherings, and then when they fly in and out and all of that, it takes time. So yeah, here's a little social, or a little intrusion going on. These two birds are actually doing what are called wing flaps. It's part of the preening. But I was talking with Dana about this because she's done a lot of behavior on, especially on mammals. But they'll do this as sort of a nervous behavior, like I call it a displacement behavior, where it's become part of the ritual of when they're dealing with each other. So instead of fighting each other, I'll do a wing flap. It's a sort of a way to sort of dissipate their aggression. If there is a chick present, they often disappear. You don't see them. And they go into hiding, and they'll stay close to shore. They'll have their head down a lot. Probably in my top 5 phone calls, we lost our chick, an intruder loon is here. And I said, well, just wait an hour or two, go back and look. Sure enough, there's the chick, most of the time. It's rare that the chick actually does get hurt or killed in a territorial battle, but it does happen. So what happened to the loon that got evicted? It could be a male, it could be a female. We've, again, mostly based on Wisconsin, they tend to go just a mile or two away to find an open spot on a lake, or further, especially if you're in this area where you don't have another lake within a few miles of each other. I mean, you got Morey, Fairleigh, Post Pond, and Miller, but then you got to go another 5 to 10 miles to the nearest one, if not longer. But as they get older, they become more passive and more likely just to go found a new spot in an empty lake, and their takeover days are over. They're not going to go challenge anybody else either. So here's a penguin dance, which is different than the wing flap. So that's a super aggressive maneuver. Those birds are like really pissed at each other. And that's what could erupt into a battle. But they're communicating with that. So will they actually get into a tangle and fight? They may, they may not. This may be enough to say, okay, I'm stronger than you, or you're stronger than me, I'm gonna give up and swim away.
When they're doing that, are they vocal as well as the...
Yeah. Yep. So I talked about moving a few kilometers away. Most of these are birds that were banded back in 1998 to 2003, when we banded about 30 birds in Vermont as part of a mercury study with the EPA and Vermont DEC. And the arrows represent where birds sort of moved from. So Bald Hill to Lake Willoughby, Bald Hill to Jobs, Lake Eden to Green River. Actually, Lake Eden to Green River, that was a bird I rescued from fishing line that was part of a pair there. A few years later, it was found nesting on Green River, so it just moved a few miles south. Zach Woods to Wolcott, Zach Woods to another one just off the screen, Greenwood to Curtis Pond. I mean, so you can see these birds were not moving very far. What's interesting is we have a bird up here, I think it was a Ziskahas in Maine, got banded over here and ended up over on Stiles Reservoir. And it was like an 84, 90 mile move, which is really rare for a bird to make that big a move. And it's most likely it made the move not by moving from Ziskahas to Stiles, but going to the ocean and then coming back north and ended up at Stiles and decided, oh, this looks better than a Ziskahas, and who knows why. So you can see these were very small moves from banded birds dispersing to nearby lakes over a period of 5 to 15 years after banding.
So a couple of times this summer, only a couple days apart, I heard loons flying over the golf course in Fairleigh, and I couldn't tell if they were leaving Lake Morey and going toward Lake Fairleigh, or if they were coming the other way.
Both ways. I'm sure there's a lot of going back and forth.
Yeah.
Throw the Connecticut River in, slow moving, they'll land there too. And yeah, and especially
this is middle of the summer.
Yep. And Lake Morey and Fairleigh are big enough that it's really easy for non-breeders to kind of just move around a lot more than the breeders. And Lake Morey didn't nest this year. They nested last year and the year before for the first time ever. And last year was their first time with a chick ever. So they're a little behind you guys, but they're doing all right. So yeah, they're cruising around, checking each other out. And especially the non-breeders, they're the ones like, I got to get on safe water. So where can I find safe water if I'm getting chased around? So visual communication. So this is again what we were seeing tonight. These little circle. We only had 2 loons, but they were doing this little maneuver. I guess he wasn't rising up like that, but they were doing what I call short dives or join dives, where they go down together and there's a little bit of a splash, but not a lot. So there was a possible aggression that we were seeing tonight. Again, but it could have been the pair, maybe just doing a courtship, because it's very similar at that stage. But if they get into more like whoosh, really, and like the water's coming up, that's a sign of like something's going on. And so yeah, you don't want to splash water around if you're swimming and a loon is 15 feet from you. You might get them riled up and they might react. We had a guy at Curtis Pond jump into the water without, just off the dock. But there was a loon with a family, a chick right there, and the bird did not like that at all, and he got poked. So it's one of the few times I've heard of a swimmer getting poked. But it was the swimmer's fault on that one. The chest head rise. So I guess this guy's kind of doing that a little bit. So that's kind of a moderate aggression. And then we have a penguin dance right there, where they're just like treading water with its feet. And sometimes the wings are in, sometimes the wings come out. But that's a super aggression. And then the chases, when they're just cruising around, sort of wing rowing, is what we call it, all around the lake. So there's kind of a list of the increase in aggression. We'll see if this works. I don't know if it will or not. No, it's not going to.
Could I ask a question before we get started on this? Several years ago, Rudy and I went to Jackson Pond, and we heard that they're attracted by singing. It's a real quiet place, so we sang, and they did actually come toward us. I was wondering how common that is. Is it
Kind of thing. Can you repeat what kind of
we
music?
sang to the loons.
What were you singing?
What kind of music?
Rebels.
Rebels music? Yeah.
So anything lyrical?
Yeah.
You just like, if you imitate a loon, sort of a whistle even, they're gonna, especially if it's quiet, and especially if there's a nest or a chick around, they're gonna be curious of, could it be another loon? They're not that smart in that regard, but they're really smart in other ways. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So yeah, we don't recommend playing calls, especially near nest or when there's chicks, because they will leave the chick, they will leave a nest to go search who that bird is. I'll talk about yodels in a minute with this guy Jay Major's work, but whale call is the more of an identification call, sort of a 1, 2, or 3 note. And they're sort of, might be on the nest for 3 or 4 hours, and they want their mate to come back. They could be looking for the chick, something like that. Could be just identifying are there any other loons out there? Do they get any response? The yodel is the male territorial call, which is what this bird is doing. They extend the head out. Only the male does it. And it's this crescendo and then this repeat syllables, up and down, up and down, up and down. It's usually 4, 5, 6 repeat syllables. And it's that they learned a ton through that. Now I'm going to go talk about that in a minute. Tremolo is more of an alert call or an agitated call, but it can also be just a pure excitement call. So, the loon laugh. And they're doing that like an eagle starts coming down the lake. They'll give a tremolo. The male might do a yodel if he's feeling threatened, but it's more likely going to be the tremolo. Another loon comes in, they might give a quick tremolo. A boater all of a sudden shows up around the corner and there's a chick, they might give a tremolo. Just kind of, hey, everybody be alert. Although they'll do it kind of just to themselves, even if there's no other loon around. So it's just sort of a response. But what's funny about the tremolo is that sometimes, especially that one, seems to get other loons to do tremolos. It's like a room full of 4 and 5-year-olds, and you get one shouting and screaming, and all of a sudden they're all shouting and screaming for no really apparent reason. So yeah, go figure. And then the hoots are the more close call, whoo, whoo, and then the chick, little raspy whistle. And so those are all some of the major ones that you'll see. Charlie Wolcott started some of the early loon research on the yodel, especially on communications at Cornell back in the 70s and the 80s. He still comes to our meetings. He's probably close to 90 years old now. Really great. I usually don't do it in public.
Don't want to start any fights.
Let me listen. I can't smile when I do it, but I'll see if I can relax my face. But it's sort of about. So this big note, that big note is what's key. That's the one that determines that other birds can tell the body condition. If it's a low, deep crescendo, other birds will know that's a bigger male, and probably better not mess with him, because just being in size, you have a dominance.
A
And-
female could fake that, couldn't she?
What's that?
A female could fake that, couldn't she?
She doesn't do they don't do that yodel call. I've seen them go into yodel position, so I'm wondering if it's more of a communication, just like, I'm really pissed, but I can't yodel, I'm just gonna get in the position. So a smaller male is just gonna be higher pitched, and so that bird might be more vulnerable to a takeover if it's part of a territory. But that smaller bird can make up for it in the repeat syllables. And Jay found this with some of those smaller males. They would do more repeat syllables than the big males. So it's just like, okay, I might be small, but I'm feisty. So it's kind of neat. But a lot of this, whether it's the visual or the verbal, it's to avoid a fight. It's like, I'm establishing it, time for you to move on. And that's usually what happens. I don't know what percent, but most of the time, you get a third bird, they'll have their little interaction. A few minutes later, it swims off, and they might fly off. And it's all because of this communication with each other, just to keep those territorial boundaries strong. And here's both verbal and visual going on here. We got a bird yodeling right there. We got a bird sort of wing rowing, and we got maybe the one not involved in who's already like, I'm just staying out of this. You guys figure it out, or you gals figure it out, and I'll see you later. So that's a great shot up on Long Pond and Westmore. All right, so let's switch gears away from the behavior stuff. Any actually questions about territoriality, intrusions, groups? Okay, we got a few of these, yeah.
How deep do they dive to escape a predator like an eagle?
They're going to stay near the surface for that, partly because they want to be able to quickly come out, and they'll actually jump at the eagle sometimes if it's coming down right. But yeah, more likely they're going to do a quick splash and get a few feet underwater, so where it can't reach them.
I remember canoeing boundary waters when I was a kid with my parents, and there was a call, and then it started raining, and my parents thought it was a rain call. Did they have anything like that, or was it just a yodel?
I'm not sure. So the bird was calling?
A particular kind of, a different kind of call,
Huh.
and then it started raining.
Who knows? I think coincidence, but at the same time, it's part of the magic of being out there with them. And it's the reason I'm doing this. I led canoe trips up in the boundary waters for years. So.
Do they ever make any calls while they're flying? Or is it always...
Tremolo in flight. So the one's going over the golf course. It's a faster tremolo than the tremolo they'll do on the water. So it's just a. So it's versus. It's a little more robust for the one when they're giving that on the water. Whereas the one in the flight. And what's interesting is. I actually want to jump back to this shot. Walter Piper has an amazing website, loonproject.org. And I swear he could have been a stand-up comedian, or he's a writer. He's just really funny, but he's also like an amazing biologist and statistician. But he talked about being out there at 5 a.m. watching a family, and all of a sudden he realizes there's a bird flying coming in, because the other loons noticed it before he did, but their movements allowed him to cue and see a bird a half-mile down flying in like this, and then all of a sudden that bird just set its wings like it's going to come in for a landing. And that's what they do. They're trying to glide in like a big glider, and when that bird set its wings, the male on the water hit the yodel button, just boom, yodel right there, and then all of a sudden that bird started flapping again. That took care of it. But he didn't yodel before. They just kind of watched. Was it going to just keep on going by? Was it worth, spending an extra 10 calories to do a yodel call? Because when you get into ecology, a lot of it's about energetics. Humans kind of defy the energetics because we're fed all the time. But these guys aren't. They got to be really careful where they're going to spend their energy, and they don't want to over defend and over communicate if they don't need to. But that was just the way he wrote that up was so good. It just made you understand this idea of communication between animals.
Eric, what's the function of the red eye on a loon? Why?
No one's really put a scientific thing on it. As a red light gets filtered, the deeper you go, so a loon eye at 20, 30 feet might just look black, like with part of their face, so you can't see it. So does that help them in fishing? So a fish can't see them coming because the red eyes, or somehow it's like it's not visible down there. That's the most plausible thing I've ever heard, but I don't think that's necessarily true. It's just sort of like, it sort of makes sense, but yeah. I need to reread it, but Jim Peruk, he's a professor at Southern Maine. He spent part of his 20, 30 years studying loons as well. And he wrote a book that came out about 5 years ago. And he goes through a lot of the evolutionary parts. And I think he addresses that, and I just can't remember what he wrote. But it's a great read from using a lot of this recent data, but incorporating it to what makes a loon. It's a good book.
Can I ask one more
Oh, yeah.
question? Every September on Squam Lake, the loons would start to gather in bigger and bigger groups before flying off.
Yep. So territoriality goes down as the summer progresses, hormones go down. So you get, especially non-breeders or pairs that have had a failed nest or lost their chicks, they're all starting to float around a little bit more, checking each other out, learning who their neighbors are, and you get these what we call social gatherings. There's still, still a lot of stuff being communicated in those gatherings, but not necessarily through aggression.
So it has nothing to do with trying to gather up together before flying off together?
Not in July and August.
No,
Maybe in September and October, but even September is a little bit early for a big group to go. You do get individuals starting to move around a lot more. We had a loon and the chick actually left their lake at the end of August up in Groton area. I was like, at 10 and a half weeks, that bird was learning to fly a few days before, and all of a sudden it was off the lake and gone. It's like, wow. It was a smaller lake, so it might be that there's food limitations and they want to get to a bigger lake. They often will move to a big lake then for a few weeks before they actually make the big journey. But most migration actually doesn't happen until October, November. Maybe September for the adults. So some other things learned. Natal site matching was Walter's word for this. Where do chicks come back? Well, after they've gone to the ocean for 3 years, they come back, they spend 3 years searching around for a territory. What type of lake do they go to? And what he found was that birds that were hatched on a small lake, under 50 acres, under 100 acres, tend to come back to a lake that size. Birds from a 5,000 acre lake, they're looking for something big. They want big city. pH is the other one. And pH is probably more an indicator of the type of fish that were in that lake. So if they like eating perch, they're going to go to, bass. I don't know. I haven't delved into the fisheries to find out which fish are associated with pH, but there's probably some truth to that. But then, an 8-year-old bird, male, gets kicked out of a territory, finds a lake as he's 12. What type of lake did he find when he was 12? Well, size no longer matters. pH still does. And now clarity seems to jump up on the regression. It's like they become specialists for clear water or intermediate or turbid. So if you become a really good turbid water fisherman or fisher bird, which means more of a cruise around, wait for something to move and grab it, versus like pursue it in really clear water. So you do get birds that can live in fairly turbid waters and do okay. Hardwick Lake, right down the road from me, it's part of a river system that's drained every year, and then they bring it back up, and it's 3 to 4 feet deep, and you put your hand in, and you just can't see. It's like, and there's a chick there pretty much almost every year. It's incredible how successful it's been. So one thing you'll see all the time is maintenance behaviors, preening. So wing flap, zipping their feathers up with their bill. There's actually a gland in the rear end called the uropygial gland, which has a oily powder, and these help spread that into their feathers a little bit, so that can help keep them waterproof. They got to do this every few hours, and sometimes it lasts 30 seconds. Sometimes they'll do a 20-minute, 30-minute workup of everything. And if they don't do this, they're going to start getting water into those feathers, and then you might as well take your 20 below down coat and jump in the lake, and that's what you're going to feel like. That's what it is. They have all downy feathers underneath, and if those get wet, they're going to sink. They're not going to be able to. They're going to get hypothermia if it's cold. So they got to maintain that waterproofness. Especially these guys. Our birds go off the New England coast. So here's my most common phone call, which is bathing, and I've labeled it sort of extreme preening because they're going nuts sometimes. They're one wing out and they're flapping in a circle. They'll do somersaults. They'll do wing rowing and then dive underwater, come shooting out, and then do it again, plunge diving. They're flushing their feathers. They're getting the deeper like mites and dirt and other things that might be in there, and then they finish with a more gentle preening. And once you know what it is, it's really fun to watch. They're just having a good time. And most water birds actually do this. So this time of year, we're going to have chicks that are actually bigger than this, but a big chick's going to have these what I call scalloped feathers, little white fringe at the end of the body feathers there. And our chicks now are going to be more like that size in September and October. The ones on the upper left, it's a little hazy. I should get a clear shot. They're going to start practicing flight. They've been putting all their energy into their legs. when a chick is 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old, you can put an adult band on the leg because the diameter is already adult size, even though the leg is only half the length. There's so much energy going into those feet, and it makes sense. They got to start learning how to get away from predators, get away from other loons, and start feeding themselves. So these are not chicks. These are adults who have gone through the partial molt in the fall and are migrating through, and that's, I remember the day, November 4, Lake Willoughby, looking for a bird and fishing line. It's 36 degrees out there. Felt like it was 36 below. It was so cold. And we came across a group of 20 loons. And most of them were these adults in migration. So really cool. Our birds head to the New England coast for the most part. So the circles are banded birds. The square is where the banded bird was seen. So you can see Maine or New Hampshire was up in the Bagog area, most of this data. So you can see all where the black squares are, those are Bagog birds, went all the way to the Cape. Maine birds, up and down that side of the coast. One went around in the Long Island Sound area. Vermont, we've had 3 recoveries. You can see all of ours are down in that area. New York even comes over this direction. But a few New York birds went way south, which was unusual. And it was kind of like, oh wow, they do actually go down to New Jersey or Delaware Bay or the Chesapeake. And I want to say one even went to North Carolina. And I'm going to have a national or North America map in a second. So the lines are telemetry, satellite telemetry. These were surgical implants working with veterinarians, and the reading is taken every 2 days. So each of those lines, there's a single line to the coast. That was a 1 reading, and then the 2nd reading. It's most likely those birds were flying without stopping. So, and they're probably getting to the coast faster than you could drive there. Again, they're going with a tailwind. They might be going 80, 90 miles an hour if they get up 3,000, 4,000 feet and are just, they're off. But they got to learn. The 3-legged one, there was a New York bird, went to the Lake Champlain, Central Vermont, and then the coast. So that's a 5 to 6 day journey for that one. The dotted line was the chick. That chick took like 56 days puddle jumping from November to January to get to Long Island Sound. He's got to figure it out on his own. She's got to figure it out on his own. They're not going with the parents. And so they're using some internal cue, which is the magic of migration, plus visual cues. Like, I know I need to kind of go that way, and then just sort of making their way. But once they learn the route, then eventually they'll be able to go as fast as their parents. On a bigger scale, as the further interior North America you go, the further south they go. So you get over into Western Ontario, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're all going to Florida and the Gulf of Mexico, most of them. Somewhere over toward Alberta, the other side of Saskatchewan, they're heading to the California coast, or even down into Mexico. You do get birds that overwinter on the Great Lakes. You'll get birds overwinter on Lake Champlain, but not usually that many.
Looks like a human migration pattern.
But what's kind of neat is, let's throw in the weights, the average weights of these birds. Let's start in Maine. Average weight of a male is 13.2 pounds. Vermont is 12 pounds. Average female is 10.3 pounds. Average Vermont female is 9 pounds. Their migration distance, 50 to 300 miles. It pays to be big to hold the territory, remember that. So if they can stay big and just do these puddle jumps to the ocean, all the better. You got a bird that has to fly 2,000 miles plus. Now you got to have efficiency, otherwise you're not going to make it. And look at the weights, almost 30-35% lighter in the Midwest, upper Midwest. So pretty cool that you got this. I mean, they're almost like a different species. They are so different in that regard. We had a neat rescue on up in Taft's Corners in Burlington. A loon landed on the water retention pond of the Shaw's and the whole Maple Place shopping center next to Friendly's restaurant. And it was May 20 or so, and we're like, oh geez, okay, it's plenty long for it to take off, but there's a fence and then there's wires and there's buildings. But I was like, let's leave it and see if it can figure it out and get the right winds. Well, it was still there in July. We knew there were fish in there because we saw cormorants take fish out of there, we saw osprey take fish out of there. So we're hoping that it was finding some fish. So we finally got permission to go in there and go over the fence and figure out what to do. And we were able to actually catch the bird within about 15 minutes, which doesn't always happen for a free swimming loon. But I went to put a band on it, a Vermont band, and it was just sliding right off the foot. It was a tiny bird. I'm like, okay, this is a bird from northern Quebec. It's probably like 3 or 4 pounds lighter than a Vermont bird, but it's just like from way up there. And came through in May 20th, whereas our birds come in April 20th. They do a delayed migration when they're going that far north because the lakes are still iced in May 1st up there. They got to wait till May 15th, or even later sometimes. So it doesn't pay to come back to Vermont lakes and hang out for a week or two and get chased around by territorial birds. Let's just stay on the ocean for an extra month and then beeline it through as fast as we can and get to Quebec that way. So that was kind of neat. So in the winter, they actually go through a full molt compared to the partial molt in the fall, and they'll go flightless for 3 to 4 weeks. And then when those feathers, or actually that's probably pre-molt right there. It's still got this black feathers on. It's probably about to go into its full molt. That adult right there, because it's done its partial molt, and that's what it looks like for a few months, and then it does its full molt. And then in late February, March, it will grow back what we see in the summertime. All right, so those are like a lot of the behavior things. I'm going to wrap up just kind of like future things that we're watching. This is a lot of the research that we're partaking with throughout North America, with all the other loon groups as well as other agencies. But we're still dealing with lead, aspergillosis, potentially malaria. Those are things we're monitoring. Climate change issues, lots of things there between food web, algae. What could warming waters do? Make aspergillosis and malaria more common. Flooding events, parasites, I mean, all things that could come with warmer waters. And then we're still dealing with, we got more people using our lakes, so we still have to figure that out. That's where we've had the most success. And like getting that steady, getting people to learn to live with loons, and it's been very successful. So that's one reason we've seen the population increase as much as it has. But we got these other things knocking on the door that, again, we're trying to keep tabs on and figure out what can we change, what can't we change, or what do we just need to like promote and get more research on. So to do some of the basic work, especially mercury and other blood sampling things, PFAS, is we'll actually catch the birds. We'll take a blood feather. These are tough students helping me out. And we'll take a feather sample, put bands on them, and then we release. Just to give an overview, mercury's now been studied in loons for about 3 decades, and way low in Alaska, much higher in New England, but we're on the really low spectrum within New England, the green. Definitely a lot more in Maine and Massachusetts. And a lot of it's where the coal burning facilities fall out. It was also where incinerators had fallout. Luckily, the incinerators, because of partly this work, have really cleaned up their act and gotten mercury out of the waste stream. There was a big push 10, 15, 20 years ago to get mercury, not, especially medical waste. Just like don't let it go in there, let your thermometers, lots of places to collect all that. And that didn't exist 20, 25 years ago. And it was a lot of this work that got that to happen. We're still getting this. Sunday night, I got an email. We got a dead loon under my dock. 2 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a report about a loon and fishing line. We went searching for it, couldn't find it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this that bird? Monday morning, I found a bird all entangled. So that one didn't make it. This one actually did make it. We rescued this female, but because of that, she got kicked out of the territory. The male wouldn't let her back. She was viewed as a weakness. So the male raised the chick the rest of that summer. It's kind of interesting. These are birds that just beached themselves and ended up dying. And we're like, geez, what's going on? So we've been trying to do necropsies on all the birds that we collect because we learn a lot from them. And if we don't do the necropsies, you're just like, oh, another dead bird. But what was it? Both of these were very lethargic. Ends up, we opened them up. We took x-rays. It wasn't this bird. This bird actually had the fishing line issue. That's Eloise Gerard on the right, my coworker for the last 4 years. And we're working with Bren Lundberg and Vince to do all this work. We're also working with Tufts and Loon Preservation Committee, sort of like, and UNH Pathology Lab. So last year I had them do a lot of the birds because I just didn't have time. But Bren and I are hoping to do a bunch of birds next month. Anyway, those 2 birds that we saw on the beach, both had a big lead sinker in them. So we're still seeing lead. Between 2019 and 21, this big uptick. Actually, it's up till 22. Last year I don't think we had any lead, and this year we've not had any. Well, I haven't done the x-rays yet, so I don't know yet. But we had like a 4-year stint of 12 birds dying from lead after a decade of almost none, very few, after the lead law went into effect in 2007. So we're like, what's the deal? Why are we seeing all of this? We have a lot more loons, so they're out there grabbing stuff, but people are still using it. Some of it was legal lead, above ½ ounce in Vermont. Some of it was illegal. It was under a half ounce. So it's still in people's tackle boxes. And so we're like, okay, we got some grant money. We're going to throw some money at it. I'll show that picture in a second. But we can also see aspergillosis, this fungal disease, which often takes off in weakened birds. But you can see 2 to 14 over those, recently 2 before. It's like, wow, what's this huge increase in asper? Does it have to do with more loons around? Is it climate change? So those are questions that I won't be answering, but it can who are the fungal experts out there and why are we seeing it? And let's do a little bit more work on this. Let's get some PhD and master's students to do work on this. And that's how we get answers like this, is it's not a one-time shot. We're like, oh, that's it. No, it's it takes years to put the data together and figure out the processes. And then we had a bunch of birds a decade ago come up with malaria. And what they saw was the spleen was twice the size of a normal spleen when they opened it up. And the pathologist was like, whoa, what's going on here? She put it under, found malaria. Ends up now we've had 10 mortalities from malaria, but luckily it's only 10. We haven't seen 100. We thought it might take off, and it hasn't. But Ellen Martinson at UVM is a malaria specialist, and she's just I took her out banding last year, and she was just this excited kid to catch these birds, and but she's just gets so excited about malaria. And she's working with deer and mosquito sampling and everything else. She's an amazing lady, really fun. And she would make you want to study malaria. She's addictive. But anyway, she's found almost 10 species of malaria in loons. There's hundreds of species of malaria, and 1 or 2 of them are the killer malaria. So are loons going to slowly learn to live with it? A lot of birds that go down to the mid-Atlantic or further south all have malaria, but they've learned to live with it. Loons are a newly exposed species, which is sort of like COVID. We haven't had it before, so we have no immunity to it. And so loons haven't had immunity to malaria, where a lot of grackles and crows, they're all carrying it around us, but they're doing just fine. But will loons learn to live with it as well, or is there maybe those 8 species are going to be fine, but the 1 or 2 are going to knock a few out? We'll find out. So Eloise and my intern Ava Purdy, who just started last week at Middlebury, have been putting up these tubes the last 2 summers for collecting lead and fishing line. We actually have not collected a lot of lead, so it makes me hopeful that maybe a lot of anglers really don't have much lead in there. It's just bad luck for a few loons. But the big thing is just really raising awareness again. We have these at 30 some access areas around the state. We've had a bunch of press releases. We're working with 30 lake associations, including Lake Fairlee, just to get it in their newsletters, get it into their e-news, other things, just if you got lead, there's a place to bring it. And so many people, they might have lead, but they're not putting it in these containers. But anyway, it's hopefully going to make a difference. And again, we didn't have any last year. We'll see what we have this year. And last thing I'm going to wrap up with is some recent stuff out of Wisconsin. I probably should end on a higher note because it actually is an amazing story, a success story. But this is definitely one that we're going to be watching closely and working with the DEC on. There's been a 20-year decline in chick productivity in Wisconsin. Every place else seems to be increasing, especially New England. But chicks get to 5 weeks of age and then they sort of start disappearing. What's going on here? And it's a 20% lower chick productivity in the past decade or 2 decades. No change in nesting attempts. All the birds are out there nesting. The hatch rates are the same, but chicks are disappearing. And what he's finding is that when you average it all out by age, the chicks have lower weight than they did 20 years ago. And then there seems to be this higher mortality. There's also a decline in the male weight. Back 20 years ago, they were up closer to 4,600 grams in Wisconsin, and now they're more like 4,400 grams on an average. And he's like, something's going on here. And same thing with that, and then this corresponds with that reduced chick survival. But what he correlated with, all sorts of things, reduced water quality, clarity. All the water clarity measures are going down over that same period of time. And loons really overall need clear water to be able to catch their fish. And if they can't see very well, may not catch as many. And so, yeah, most birds are water quality or clear water specialists. You do get birds that learn how to feed in something like that. That's actually Hardwick Lake. I just took that for the photo. But we've had some extreme cases, nothing like the subtleness that was Wisconsin. But it's going to contribute was the flooding last year on Lake Rescue turned that lake into pea soup. You could not see it all. They had their first chick ever, The adults left right away. I mean, you could not see an inch into that water. It was just sludge. The chick was dead 5 days later. And we actually sent that one to UNH pathology lab, vet pathology lab, and it had an intestinal infection and poor nutrition. It wasn't like E. coli or anything, but this bird obviously was starving and had gotten, just from drinking all the bad water, something going on in there. So that's kind of the extreme case. This may have been a more subtle case. Ricker Pond. We had a chick go over the dam. We put her back on the lake, thinking, oh, come on, parents, get your act together. Was it a random chance? And I noticed it was a little bit light, and it wasn't that feisty. So I actually let Nora, a friend of mine's daughter, help me release it. Great experience for her. But a week later, went back over the dam. Somebody else put it back in, so I went out that afternoon, and I was able to find it sort of swimming along shore, but like almost beaching, but not quite. And I'm like, oh man, this bird's not going to make it. It was so weak. But we brought it to Vin's. They now have some pools, and they started sort of force feeding it fish. They actually got some live fish, which the bird loved from biodiversity, or through not through them, but through a source that they had. That's a group in Maine. And that bird just started gobbling it up. Within a week, it was a pound heavier. Within 2 weeks, it was 2 pounds heavier, and we were able to release it. And that bird is now flying around. It was actually released in Western Mass as part of a release effort to establish birds there, in Loons in Western Mass. And it was there for like a week or two on the lake they released, and then it disappeared. But a month later, they saw it about 10 miles away on another lake. So that one turned into a good story. But why was it so weak? Was it because of water clarity and the flooding coming from Lake Groton? And it just couldn't see as well, and just not, parents couldn't feed it as much, and it just, was that what was going on? So again, an extreme case because of these floods, more minor in Wisconsin, or is there something else going on in Ricker Pond? But water clarity was definitely a factor in this case. It's just whether it was the cause of that bird starving. And what we can do about it, I mean, flooding is a big one. That's climate change. It's like lots of things that are out of our immediate hands, but we can do little things, especially the people who live on lakes. We can do what we can right on our shorelines. So, maintaining that habitat, left versus right, there's a lot more erosion going on, a lot more sedimentation from that house on the right. So, loons are doing amazing right now, but it's going to take vigilance, and Lake Fairlee's right on the lead edge. They have a great staff of folks on their committees to make things happen and watching out for a lot of these things. And I'm just one little part of it, but it's really fun to work with them. And we're just seeing the stories like this. And so, yeah. So vtecostudies.org. For me, Loon at vtecostudies.org. That way Eloise and myself can both see this. And we're always looking for more people to chime in.
There's the egg.
And thank you for going way over time, I'm sure, because it's fun to tell these stories.